Welcome to the Hospital Finance Podcast, your go-to source for information and insights that can help you stay ahead of the challenges impacting healthcare finance. And now, the host of the Hospital Finance Podcast, Michael Passanante.
Hi, this is Mike Passanante, and welcome back to the award-winning Hospital Finance Podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, I invite you to head up to Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars, and leave a positive review. This will help new listeners in the healthcare space find the show. And with that, we'll move on to today's program. Annually, CMS proposes changes to the inpatient prospective payment system rules that can impact how IPPS facilities are reimbursed from Medicare, either positively or negatively. The final rule provides updates to reimbursement driven by MS-DRGs and ICD-10 coding. To provide an update on changes to MS-DRGs for the coming year, I'm joined by Mary Devine, Senior Director of Revenue Cycle Services at BESLER. Mary, welcome back to the show.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Mary, how many DRGs will there be in 2021?
So in 2021, Mike, it remains, it goes up from 761, which was in 2020, up to 767. And that is really with additions and deletions. And there were a net of 6 new DRGs that they added for 2021 that went into effect on 10/1/20.
So let's talk about some of those additions particularly. Can you summarize the additions for us this year?
Absolutely. So there were 12 new DRGs that were added, and there were 2 added for the CAR T-cell immunotherapies. And then they really did 2 new DRGs relating to hip replacements. And then finally, there were head and neck and ear, nose DRGs that were new, but they deleted the older ones. So, so we have a net of 6 new DRGs for the new year.
And were there any notable deletions?
The only notable deletion was relating to the all the head and neck. They really were, and all the new ones that they put on, they deleted the old ones. So that was about it.
Got it. Mary, what would you say are some of the biggest changes that are coming as a result of the final rule?
So first, I want to talk about the bone marrow transplants. That is for DRGs 14, 16, and 17. Those in the past had been surgical DRGs, and those were moved to medical DRGs. And really the position and the comment was due to the fact that you would liken a bone marrow transplant to a blood transfusion, and it really isn't surgical. And they did that based on the resources that it's consuming during the process. So that went from a surgical to a medical. And then the next big one is, and I kind of mentioned it briefly because they added in DRGs for it, is the CAR T-cell therapies, which is the chimeric antigen receptor. And it really is T-cells that are genetically engineered to produce an artificial T-cell receptor. And this is used for immunotherapy that fights off cancer. And previously, it was when you utilize one of the 2 ICD-10 codes indicating that you were going to be administering this, you would get an add-on payment. And starting in 2021, that add-on payment goes away. And then they wanted to propose that they add a new DRG, and that in fact happened with the DRG 18. And then finally, and I'll mention it briefly, is the add-on of the 2 new DRGs as it relates to the hip replacements. And there was some discussion that based on the type of material the hip replacement is used, that would dictate recovery, the length of recovery. And they kind of disagreed with that. And what they wanted to do is they really wanted to track whether the replacement was due to a fracture or not. So they added in 550 and 551, which is hip replacement due to a fracture with and without complications.
Okay. Are there any changes affecting the transfer rule?
This year, there are 280 DRGs now impacted by the rule. That was up from last year, which was 278. And 278 was the first time that the number of DRGs had dropped in quite some time, but it bounced right back up again to 280. And that is due to the addition of the 2 hip replacements. 467 and 470 are already impacted by the rule. They are the original hip replacements, and now you have the hip replacements due to fracture, and those 2 are also impacted by the rule. And that's the only change for the rule. There's still 9 discharge status codes impacted by the rule, and that's it for the changes to the transfer rule.
Okay. For those in our audience, Mary just completed a very comprehensive webinar that goes a lot deeper on this content, and that recording is now available on our website at BESLER.com. So just head up there, go to the Insights button, look for Revenue Cycle Insights, and you can watch that entire webinar, which covers this content and a whole lot more. Mary, thanks for coming back to the show today and giving us an update on the DRGs affected in 2021.
Thank you.
This concludes today's episode of the Hospital Finance Podcast. For show notes and additional resources to help you protect and enhance revenue at your hospital, visit BESLER.com/podcasts. The Hospital Finance Podcast is a production of BESLER. Smart about revenue, tenacious about results.